Hello and welcome to The Public Good. This is Deja James from Partnership for the Public Good, or PPG, which unites over 340 community organizations working to build a better Buffalo. We're delighted to join you every Tuesday morning at 10:30 a.m. on Power 96.5 FM and Mix 1080 a.m. You can also watch full video of every show on our YouTube page. Follow PPG Buffalo on Facebook and Instagram for more information on how to access video and the full podcast of our show. And of course, you can always get great information on our website, ppgbuffalo.org. Before I introduce our guests, I want to highlight a new way you as a listener can interact with us here on The Public Good. We want to hear your thoughts on how we can better our community. Email us at info@ppgbuffalo.org to let us know your ideas for change. We'd love to hear of community organizations you appreciate or initiatives you believe need more spotlight. We also encourage commentary on the current show, questions, or feedback. Reach out at info@ppgbuffalo.org. Be sure to let us know where you're listening from and who you are. Okay, back to the show. This week, we are joined by Hagar Hafez from New York Immigration Coalition to discuss both Erie County and New York State language access. Many communities are unable to access public services due to language barriers. Families are clinging to community to help them navigate very complex systems. We want to discuss both the county and the state's responsibility to ensure all have vital access to information and services in the languages of what we now know is a multi-ethnic society. So first, I just want, Hagar, if you want to introduce yourself and what inspired you to advocate on behalf of immigrants and refugees.
Hi, so nice to see you, Deja.
Yeah.
We work a lot on language access together, and thank you for having me.
Mm-hmm.
My name is Hagar Hafez. I work at the New York Immigration Coalition. I am a manager of organizing and strategy in the Western New York area, which means there are many of me all across the state doing the work I do regionally. And what inspired me to do immigration advocacy is that so many things. One being that I am an immigrant myself. Came here with my family in 2015, and a lot of the barriers faced by the community are barriers my parents faced at home, and I was new in this country and I had to navigate also a system that I am unfamiliar with. Obviously, it is a privilege that I am an English speaker, or English is my second language, and I was able to learn that back home, and my parents don't have that privilege. So I have always, I guess, like ever since I was 11, wondered like why the world is the way it is. Like, very naively, I was just trying to understand why our nation's poor, or why, for example, in my country at the time, there was no domestic violence shelters for women. So I tried to understand that, and I guess like things are so interconnected to where you understand the many layers that affect a people's and what they go through. So I have always been interested in human rights in general, and trying to advocate for that, because I feel like there is no way to live or to exist in a society without understanding the collective suffering, or the collective pain, or the collective whatever you want to call it, plight faced by either the majority of the people, the minority of the people, or the people in general all across the world, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, obviously you come from a space where you have a lot of different perspectives, because you've seen, I think, more than even just like the domestically born American might have seen in their lifetime. And so I guess like when we talk about immigration advocacy, a lot of the times xenophobia just gets in the way of being able to actually get things done for communities that people other. And we other communities within our own community domestically, but I think especially when you're like geographically an other, for some reason, there's just an extra layer piled on. So I'm wondering, like, just from your perspective of coming from a different country, seeing society there and then seeing society here, like how do you think that impacted your like political views? Do you think it made you more open-minded and trying to like understand suffering and people a little bit more? And how do you think Americans could do a better job at doing that? Is it like, do they need to leave the country to see? Do they need more tangible experience? Like, what do you think could help people understand?
Wow, that's such a like beautiful question.
Yeah.
But I think really what I feel would help everybody all across the world is empathy. And I think it's so easy to just say empathy, but really what it is seeing how susceptible you also are in being in another person's situation. So on a domestic level, for example, the very high homelessness rates, a lot of people will say like, oh, people don't work hard enough to get out of their situations or whatnot, because they don't see how close they are in being in another person's shoes. And in the same way, I think, you know, I grew up in an interesting place in the world. I grew up in North Africa, Middle East, part of the Arab world, and like conflict was something that I've seen ever since I was a child. Like that's what we grew up knowing, and a big part of it was understanding like why. You know, why is there a specific hate? Is there a bad and good? And really what I understood is like there is no bad and good. Life isn't like that big split of duality. It's really that like people are all, like I said, like you could have a very safe life, a very secure job. You could have worked 30 years in your field, and all of a sudden that could just go away. And that is the immigrant experience, is that you could have had a life and you don't suspect that one day it's just gonna crumble before your eyes. And I think like domestically, here in the society, I've seen like such a individualistic approach, or like such a siloed approach, where you know, people are very organized here, but I think to a degree where they do not understand, I guess, like how easy it is to just lose control or like lose. And I think, to be honest, I've seen it here that people of color are more susceptible to experience that loss. And so they have, I think, more of an understanding of what it's like to be displaced, or more of an understanding of what it's like to lose a loved one or a home, or, you know. So yeah, I think traveling abroad is a great experience to just understand that people abroad have lives too. They have loved ones, and they're happy to welcome you in their homes and have a conversation, and you'll understand that the human experience is really just the human experience. And if you were in anybody's shoes, you would be able to feel for them and share their experience. It's just that, are you able to listen? Are you able to see? Are you able to discover? Or are you just going to isolate yourself within your own experience as a person?
Yeah, and I think that's so easy, like you said, in American like individualism, and the way we're like taught to maybe like defend ours and maybe our immediate family, right? It's like, that's it. That's our nucleus. The idea of community, I don't think has ever been shared across segregated lines. So with intra communities, like the Black community or the Asian community, or what may have certain ideals and senses of community that are a little bit broader, but because of segregation, we're still so separated, even though we're facing the same issues. And especially in a place like Buffalo, where we know it's like history of redlining and just historical segregation, racial segregation, economic segregation, all of those things, like it makes people stay within their own bubble of understanding. And some of it like systemically so. So I think that's always so interesting. I think especially as Buffalo is becoming so multi-ethnic, and it always really has been. But I think that there were socially acceptable ethnicities before and I won't go too much into that, but I think now that there's more of an other that makes people a little bit more uncomfortable, whether it be because of historical impacts or other things like that. It's harder for us to like bridge those gaps or welcome community a little bit. But I hope that, and I've like, for me being like a Black person that's from Buffalo, but at the same time being descended from Cuban immigrants as well, like I've just always had that duality of understanding too, of like, yes, I'm a part of the Black community, but there's another half of me that isn't included in this community. And why is that? Because I'm finding when I participate in both, that they're almost the exact same. And when I take the time to visit other communities and get to know people like you or other Middle Eastern communities or African communities or things like that, I'm finding there's a lot of similarity points that if we actually were able to have discussion, in a constructive way, I think that we would find those points of commonality a little bit more and be able to like rely on each other more. But it's just been so difficult to cross those lines for whatever reason. I don't know why Buffalo in particular has that challenge. I mean, I think it's probably everywhere, but here with the community being so small, we're supposed to be the city of good neighbors, all of these things, right? I don't know. It seems like a challenge that's kind of insurmountable a little bit here.
I think you bring up such good points.
Yeah.
All across what you just said. I think some interesting aspect of this is when I came here, when I was studying, I studied economics and political science in UB, and when I was studying economics, I had an amazing professor who introduced me to American labor struggles. And I knew some stuff about the history of America from my education back home, but understanding the labor struggle in America is like understanding that exact thing you're talking about, that division between communities that share the same struggle. And like you see it evolve from like how, unions weren't always protecting like workers of color or immigrant workers, and they would separate them by language or separate them so they can't organize. So there is a disempowerment aspect in our lack of unity, and I think it is so powerful to see communities come together and share and understand that, that your own struggle concerns me. It's like, you can try and protect your own family. You can try and just do your best for your kids, which is we should all do. But understanding that your kids being okay means my kids being okay. Your livelihood means my livelihood, and that we're all just little pieces of a puzzle, and like we are not the center of our own universe kind of thing.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think especially the disempowerment piece, it's, like it's a divide and conquer thing, right? Like making sure that we stay separated so that we can't have that unified power.
Right.
And not to try and loop it back to what we're supposed to be talking about, but I think language access really is a huge key of being able to unify communities with information.
Yes.
And the lack of access to information is another way that people divide and conquer, and kind of subjugate certain communities. And so I want us to talk a little bit about why language access is so important, but specifically, I guess what we're trying to do now, both on the county and state level. I think the state work is really interesting. But if you could quickly just, we're doing county stuff this week particularly, so I want to make sure we plug that before we get into the larger conversation of longer term goals we have with kind of state advocacy. So, but what are we doing kind of at home base here? What is the county level language access that we've all been trying to achieve for a long time now?
Yes. Like you said, language access is a part of this bigger conversation that we're talking about because, ideas are very powerful, sharing thoughts are very powerful, and learning about each other is very powerful. Storytelling is powerful. And I think being so disempowered to not be able to speak about your own, trauma as an immigrant or stories, or even advocate for yourself or your family or for your kids. And we're going to talk more in detail about this, but it's all a part about understanding one another and like not having prejudice, or like really understanding that we are very more similar than we think we are. On the county level, you, Deja, have been working very hard at this as well, 4 years, PPG and NYC where I work, and along with a lot of community organizations, whether they serve immigrants or not. And when I say not, they still do serve immigrants because they are a fabric of the community. But, we've been advocating and working very hard to pass this language access bill that would ensure that county-run offices have in-person interpreters, and they make sure they translate their documents in the top 6 languages, which is a start. It's like, a part of a very powerful journey, I think, and making sure people are getting the information they need in their language, making sure people are getting the services they're entitled to in their language, and having people be included in the society. And I think from my work at some point as an interpreter, translator, and a case manager in the past for immigrants, I understood how there's a lot of layers to this. There's lack of access to a lot of services, and you face that through such a different lens if you're a child, if you're elderly, if you're disabled, and if you're a person of color who's an immigrant. Like, there's a lot of disparities within that community just because of language access.
Yeah. No, and there really is like different disparities between the communities. It's really interesting. And it is just a start. Because there is still, while the county bill is amazing, there is other counties that wouldn't be implicated in this, like Niagara County or some of the southern tier counties that we know that a lot of immigrants have moved to for work, for factory jobs, for whatever. And so we want to make sure that that's not just staying within Erie County, but actually helping everybody, at least in New York State. So wondering what some of the state work is around language access and what are the goals to really push the envelope to go beyond just having 6 languages in our county, but really actually striving towards access. And I think even job access or employment opportunities for the resource of languages we have spoken in our regions. But I'll let you speak a little bit more about the state advocacy stuff.
No, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was an interesting thing you brought up, which is I forgot. But I'm going to speak about the state language access. So on the state level, we are trying to find long-term solutions. Okay, now I remember there's always going to be displacement. There's a lot of conflict going on in the world, and there will be climate refugees and climate immigrants very soon. And I think language access is not just something we're solving a current huge problem with, but long term, we're going to need this. And we're kind of have to do the work whether now or later. So it's better to just be prepped and do it now. Right. So there's an interesting statistic that New York State has more languages spoken in it than countries recognized by the UN. Wow. So there's a lot of languages spoken here. And, on the state level, we're trying to cater to that by, I worked as an interpreter as well. And I worked at an organization, and, being an interpreter, you work per diem. You can make $30 a week. You can make, you can make $60 a week if you have 2 appointments.
So it's not hourly.
No, it is per diem. You get called to an appointment. If you come, you get paid by that. And, COVID played into that. And then a lot of the appointments are online, so you get paid even less. And then there's language line of where, they pay interpreters abroad, which is hard, also costly time-wise, because you can be in the hospital, you could wait like an hour and a half to get an interpreter for the right language or the right dialect. And you might lose connection, and then the person abroad will be paid like $1 per interpreting appointment. So our solution is twofold. One, let's keep our money in our economy, and that would be awesome for Buffalo and for other regions across New York State. And the solution is to start interpreter and translator cooperatives, language justice cooperatives, having interpreters be able to own their own time and be contracted. So if a government office or a different office contracts an interpreter translator full-time, they could be paid full-time and support their family. They could, we're essentially investing in our workforce. And obviously the problem of like, there's no interpreter on site, or we don't know what to do in case of this. And there will be in person, services. And so the plan is hopefully to secure funding to be able to start cooperatives regionally and have committees that track, also with the Erie language access bill, we're trying to do that, have committees that track the regional trends of language and what are the languages we need right now? There's also a piece of it of where, and I'm sure we'll get to that more, the burden of interpreting and translating does fall on either the child immigrant at home who, you know, is barely trying to navigate their childhood as a displaced child. And two, community members who do not get paid for that work because, you know, kind of apart from the individualistic nature, a lot of immigrant communities are so tight of where if you call somebody, they'll show up and they'll interpret for you if they have the time, but they don't get paid for their time. And that's something we also want to be aware of, to like lift that burden, let a child be a child. A lot of kids have to miss school in order to go interpret at an appointment at DSS for their parents, or, you know, when your mom is stressed, you'll do whatever you can to be there for her. Yeah.
And communities, like you said and pointed out, are like, they're already there for each other. They're already filling in this gap that the government should be responsible for, but without compensation. Right. So maybe your pastor or your imam or whoever actually does come with you to your appointments, but shouldn't they be able to be compensated for their time and that skill that they already are utilizing, right? Because that skill, the language services are within the community, but they're not being properly compensated or given the opportunity to actually use it in a constructive way for them. And at this point, they're doing it at their own deficit, because if they're taking their time to help their neighbor or their church member or whoever, that's taking away from the time they're earning money for themselves or providing for their own family.
Exactly.
But being able to, like you said, keep the money within our economy and keep it local in that way would help uplift these communities and just be better for everyone. So, but I'm really interested, especially since you came and you've talked about how you've had to help your parents, but really what is that impact psychologically when you're a kid, but having to deal with adult paperwork, adult themes, things that, you know, an 11-year-old, even I've seen as young as 7 or 8 years old translating for their parents. Honestly, even younger than that, I've seen. And they've had to become so advanced so soon because they're filling in this gap of adult responsibilities that their parents can't meet because of this barrier. Absolutely. Like, what is the impact long term on a child that has to do that? Yeah,
I mean, I told you I came here maybe 18, so I was a little bit older, and I spoke English, and I had to like go through a lot of, mentally, like a lot, just navigating that. And
it had to be so overwhelming.
Yeah.
Like at 18, I mean, I was overwhelmed by just like college paperwork, and you were doing that for yourself on top of everything else.
As a student from abroad, understanding and navigating that, and like understanding that educational system, wanting to make something of myself, and like thinking about all the things, because it is different back home. Like, what internships should I do? How? I don't have any connections in this country, but still, like, I want to do something for myself. But then as a parentified immigrant child, it's like, oh, but you're not focusing on us. Like, you have to be present, you have to do more. And my parents and you know, I want to share a lot of like different little pieces of stories from other community members, but my parents, for example, get so overwhelmed with mail. They hate it. Like, I've seen my mom scream because how bad it is. Just like, I have all these paperwork, there's so many dates, there's so many bills, I don't know, like, am I gonna go to jail? Am I gonna, like, what's going on? So having to navigate this, and even for English speakers, some of the language is hard to understand, and like, is this a bill due? Is it not? Am I supposed to show up? Like, having to understand this, or like taxes. I had to file taxes for my parents for years, not even understanding what's going on.
I barely understand taxes now.
Right. It's so confusing. And like, now I have a better understanding of it. And by the time I was case manager, I was like really good at navigating those systems. But I think what a lot of people miss also is the fact that immigrants come here carrying their own trauma. Sometimes they're stuck at a camp for an average of 14 to 22 years. And, you know, sometimes they were displaced in another country, and then this is their third or fourth country coming in. So this is their third system having to navigate. A lot of immigrants come here and they have a second language just because they lived in
somewhere else for so long.
Waiting. Yeah. And then they come here, and I do want to flag something is that, like, for example, if there's like many varieties of statuses, right? And so that in itself makes you able to receive different services based on your status and for a very limited amount of time. So they have that of an obstacle to look forward to.
Learning all the different statuses, learning what I can get, what I can't get, when I have to renew this, when I have to renew that. I mean, I've just seen.
It is hard. Like I've seen a lot of elderly immigrants who come here at a very old age, disabled, unable to get their disability because of a language barrier, because they can't really talk about it. They don't have the vocabulary to speak it. And also it's just so complicated, and like people have to struggle through that, but let alone having to struggle on top of it of not being able to access language. But yeah, kids, I've seen kids, like you said, as young as 6, as young as, 4, that are in tune with things that are way bigger than them. Some of them have chronic diseases. I've seen kids who are bedbound, having to help out their parents with things like that. I've seen kids whose father abandoned them while they have a pregnant mother, and they have 3 other brothers and sisters, and they are trying to help their mom out, fill out DSS paperwork or like, doing the mail. And as a case manager at the time, you serve people for a specific amount of time, and they tell you have to help them be quote unquote self-sufficient, meaning I have to show you, for example, Deja, like where to go for the service or where to advocate for your kid. But I could show you how to get there. I could bus train you. But what about in the future when you're all on your own? And you don't have that language service? Are you ever going to be...
Who can you ask the question to after that? After your services are cut off, refugee resettlement's done, after 90 days or so, your case manager's gone, all your supports are gone. It's horrible. It's absolutely terrible. I don't want to cut you off. We're having such a great conversation, but we're already reaching the end of our time. But I just want to reiterate to the community why there's so many layers that a lot of Americans could never really understand. And so, like you said, I think the summary of this is really empathy, because you never know what type of position you'll be in. And a lot of these systems are hard for us to navigate already, and let alone having all these other, intersections and issues on top. So everyone, please be more mindful, support language access. There's a public hearing Thursday at 6 p.m. downtown at the County Legislature building, 95 Franklin. We thank you all so much for listening. This is Deja James with Partnership for the Public Good, or PPG, uniting over 340 organizations working to build a better Buffalo. Be sure to email us with your comments at info@ppgbuffalo.org. Thank you so much, Hagar, for being here.
Thank you,
It's The Public Good, Tuesdays at 10:30 a.m. on Power 96.5 FM and Mix 1080 a.m.